Chancellor Patton, President Gertler, Chief Librarian Alford, graduates and guests. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the graduating students of the class of 2023. I am deeply honored to be your convocation speaker and indeed to be part of the class of 2023. All of you should take pride in what you have accomplished, not only in respect of your academic achievements. Many of you have also overcome financial challenges to complete your degree, and very many have faced major personal and social changes in the last few years. Toronto and this university can be a pretty big shock for students coming from very different environments. I can't imagine that any of you did not have to deal with some major changes, whether academic, social, or personal. When President Gertler called to let me know that I was to be awarded an honorary degree, and when I later learned that this would occur at today's convocation, of course, I wondered what I might say in my remarks. What might I say to such a diverse group? Some of you will spend your working lives in libraries, archives, and museums, while others will have careers in medical settings and laboratories, yet others on sports fields, gyms, and locker rooms. I asked myself, is there perhaps some challenge that these graduates will face in common? And then it dawned on me that the challenge that each of you will face is continuing to cope with change. Sometimes we take change for granted. It is not very hard to change from one room in residence to one on another floor. But it is much harder to move out of residence to live with your partner. It is quite easy to switch from a course in cataloging to one on book history, but a much greater decision to switch your major from information studies to kinesiology. Many changes we must face and deal with right away, figuring out how to use that new operating system on our computer. However, other changes require near-term actions to achieve long-term goals, goals which may have a low probability. For example, becoming head trainer for the Raptors. Some changes are much more challenging. For some problems require not just individual actions, but changes to group behavior for their solution. Everything from small teams to organizations to society as a whole. Again, overcoming some challenges requires short-term pain for long-term gain. The best example of this is climate change. When I was in university, many of us knew about long-term changes in climate. Some knew that 15,000 years ago, Toronto was covered with a massive ice sheet, which later retreated and carved out our beautiful ravines. But sadly, we were slow to learn and slower to admit that human behavior affected long-term climate. In that regard, I'm afraid that my generation has let yours down. We just haven't been willing to change our lifestyles to suffer some short-term pain when the benefits are long-term. Your generation, I'm afraid, will suffer the future pain. No doubt many of you will be agents for positive change. Who knows, 50 years from now, one of you may be standing where I am today, receiving your honorary degree. Perhaps it will be for the contribution you make to solving the climate change problem. 50 years ago, we didn't know about that problem. So how can you know what problems you might face? Do you know enough about the future to be confident that you are ready? Indeed, do you know enough about the opportunities and challenge the future will bring for you in particular? Sometimes what happens in our lives is very different from what we prepare for. Certainly, most of you will pursue the careers that you have worked towards in the last few years. But some of you may surprise yourselves as to the career in which you will be successful. Let me illustrate by my own case. 54 years ago, I thought my first university degree had prepared me for my future. That first degree was in arts, and eventually I received a PhD in philosophy. My goal was to be a university professor. Had I worked a little harder and had circumstances been different, I might have realized that dream. Instead, after receiving an MBA, where I specialized in public administration, I found myself with a job in the investment industry. This occurred completely by chance. I visited a broker for another purpose, and by the end of the day, I had a job, although I hadn't taken specialized courses in finance or investments. To be honest, I was very surprised and somewhat scared. To make a long story short, I worked hard and learned on the job and had a relatively successful career. In looking back, I don't think the specifics of my university education had very much to do with my success. I strongly believe that long-term success is primarily determined by personal strengths and character, not what you learned in that second-year course in data sciences. Like me, you could probably learn that on the job. However, that is not to say that your last few years have been poorly spent. Your education here at Toronto has hopefully taught you some things of incredible value: how to best make use of your natural abilities, how to think and communicate, how to adapt, and it has helped you build your character. These are the things that will determine your success, no matter what you do, either the career you now dream of, or like me, something totally unanticipated. Now, I should point out that it has been a very good thing for the University of Toronto that I didn't become a philosopher. For had I not made that surprise change into the investment world, I would never have had the financial resources to build the rare book collection that I donated to the university. However, I also needed another resource. My interest in the study of philosophy never left me. Without it, the many evenings and weekends doing the necessary research on philosophers and their books would have been spent in some other way. One needs both financial resources and knowledge to build an outstanding collection. Having this other passion also made my life much richer. Therefore, I would suggest that you too find another passion besides your work. It is time for me to bring my address to a close. Because I have made some claims to having a philosophical temperament, I thought I should conclude with a comment that is food for thought. If you were to ask me, how did you learn to cope with change? My answer would be something that the poet Rilke wrote: try to love the questions. That is to say, I learned, or at least tried to learn, to love questions more than answers. Thank you.